And welcome back to Frankly Speaking in conjunction with May He Reign. Joining me on the line tonight is Julien DeMarco of the vlog May He Reign, and also Evan LeDoux is on the line. How you gentlemen doing tonight?
I'm doing very well. How about you?
Hanging in there. Evan, how are you, buddy?
Great, thank God.
Well, you guys all know Julien. Me and Julien work together a lot, and then me and Evan have done some work in the past too, podcasting, talking about various issues. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we got a very interesting topic that's going to be very concerning to Catholics, and we're going to be talking about the traditionalist movement in America. As there seems to be a traditionalist movement that's often infighting with itself, and as the church is kind of caught up in the midst of its own passion at this point in history and struggle and crisis, I guess with that has come lots of confusion. And what's interesting to me, Evan, is that Our Lady in several apparitions has warned us there would be a period of time where this apostasy would creep into the very top levels of the church, and with that, great confusion would sort of take over the church. I believe is at Fatima. I know for myself, I've become very disenchanted with many traditionalist movements. I don't use the word trad anymore. I prefer to use, I guess, a label like integralist, I guess you could say. But in the traditionalist movement, there's been, lots of infighting, and it's been very off-putting, has it not?
Well, absolutely, and that's just the thing. The very idea of such a movement is to encapsulate tradition, and tradition, as we know, isn't a fad. It's just the way of things. So we went from places like Europe, where going back to tradition is something. It's like something they've actually experienced, but in America, we're not really going back to something that we had completely. Sure, if you grew up decades ago in like Louisiana or parts of the country that had a Catholic culture, the Southwest or whatever, sure, maybe you had some tradition, but for many people, they're trying to come back to something they never really experienced. And so it seems, and I use the word seems deliberately, that in many places you end up with a traditional ism, something that is aping what it's trying to create.
Yeah, that's Julien. You talk a lot about LARPing, specifically within the traditionalist community. Excuse me. What are your thoughts on the trads?
Well, it does kind of lend itself to live action role playing, which, don't get me wrong, I love live action role playing. I've been to the Ren Fair and everything. It's all good fun.
Sure.
But it does tend to seem almost a caricature of itself. Or I don't necessarily want to say a caricature, but almost like an idol. If that could be the right word.
Right.
Evan, what do you think? Evan, do you think that that would be the right word, idol?
Well, I mean, that's the thing. The faith is complete, but when people, sort of thanks to modernity, tend to break up pieces of the faith and look at them separately, they can become their own thing, disconnected from the whole. And if you want to use the word idol, yeah, that can definitely apply in places where previously, like for instance, if someone were to tell you the Latin Mass can be an idol, that is a earth-shattering statement. But in our days, in our confusing days, as Frank says, it's not something that it is something that some people will come forward and say, actually, I've seen such and such a thing. I've seen people treat bits of the faith as if it were the entirety of the faith and let everything else go by the wayside.
Yeah, so it's that idea that these bits and pieces become the whole when they're really novelties, but they're good novelties, but they're not the whole of the faith. And you know, other people have said it probably better than I can, but it's the fact that for the longest time, traditionalists, or not necessarily traditionalists, but the before the Second Vatican Council, and it does seem after the Second Vatican Council, that before the Second Vatican Council, people could tell you about obscure practices that were, I wouldn't say on the periphery of the faith, but they could tell you about some niche devotion or some niche private revelation, but almost not be able to tell you anything about the basic fundamentals of the faith. And that generally tends to be the case now with traditionalism, in the case that they're trying to revive something that seems to be, I guess, a misrepresentation of what traditionalism actually is. And Charles Coulomb said this once, is that in Europe, it just is. There is no such thing as a traditionalist movement because they have their tradition. In America, since it was never Catholic to begin with, what traditionalists really are trying to do is reach a new paradigm, which seems, but they don't know it, that they're trying to reach a new paradigm. What they think they're trying to do is revive old things that never really existed in America, instead of trying to, what would the right word be, Evan? Move forward while preserving the traditions. I feel like there's a word for that.
Well, I mean, you could just phrase it simply: not role playing.
Not
Being fully invested in the time in which we live, but or the maxim being in the world but not of it, without resorting to these types of temptations, because in the end that's what they are. They're temptations. The devil, on one hand, can say, "Oh, do such and such bad thing." Well, for most people, direct temptations like that don't work, because we know our catechism. We're fairly self-aware people, and obvious temptations are pretty easy to spot. But sort of like what C.S. Lewis gets to in his Screw Tape Letters, the devil often will use our strengths as to become our greatest weaknesses. Okay, so and so, you can't keep so and so from going to church, then rather focus your efforts on keeping him gossiping about people in church, devouring his brothers, infighting, all these sorts of things. So it's easy for the evil one to make people, or to tempt people towards being self-satisfied, when in reality they have merely accrued things or practices, things that are good, but in and of themselves, I mean, that's just what we find ourselves in, this place where we have this cognitive dissonance between what we see and the reality on the ground, regardless of where you go.
Jeremy Bannister, recently was replying back to comments on a couple of videos, I think about 2, maybe 3 weeks ago, and he was talking about how everybody has suffered from modernity, and that the traditionalist movement hasn't escaped that either, and how there, if you really, he was talking about women and he was talking about men, and if you question some women who go to the Latin Mass and who are part of the traditionalist movement, but if you really question them on some things, they really have modernist views, and then he flipped it and started talking about men and how they really have too many. I think what he said was too many men are spending too much time on the internet and not doing what they should be doing. And I've taken a lot of time off the internet, and I sometimes have gotten off social media for weeks at a time, and I'll get back on,
Yeah.
and I'll see the same people on, and it's just like, shouldn't you be praying or doing something?
Yeah.
But yet you're constantly posting about traditionalist stuff. Okay, well, why don't you go live it?
Yeah. I mean, I think I've made this point for many years here, and because I've been in social media now, at least podcasting and things like that, for about a couple decades now. I have lots of experience in sort of that classical liberal world is where I started, and then eventually a little bit into traditionalist movement. Now, first of all, I want to echo something that Julien said. Being Italian, I have no idea what the word traditional Catholic actually means in that regard, because in Italy we're just Catholics. The word traditional in front of Catholics, it never came up, and that's why when I discovered traditionalism, ironically enough, on Facebook of all places, when I first started using the Facebook interface at as much as I do now, I discovered all these groups and some of the debates that they have, and it was interesting. It was fascinating at first because they pointed out some of the problems in the church and things of that nature. And but the idea of what is a tradition, I thought Catholics were just Catholics. Now, obviously, we're human beings, and within human institution, we have a fallen nature. Things are gonna, we're gonna disagree, we're gonna argue. But I think it's a situation where social media, particularly, there's that fascination, and I'm probably guilty of this right now too. There's that fascination of wanting to be noticed, wanting your opinion to be heard, which is very American in many respects, right? But there's a lot of competing sects online where everybody wants their voice to be heard because their point of view is the right point of view. The first really thing that comes to my mind is church militant in many ways, which at first I enjoyed church militant, but the more I watch them and follow them, while they on its surface, they purport to support traditional Catholicism. When you go deeper into them, especially with their battle with the SSPX, and not that I'm an SSPX member, I'm not, I've never even been to an SSPX church. I find it interesting how they're picking battles against other Catholics. Granted, Evan, I know there's probably a discussion to be had about the role of the SSPX, but what I'm finding is, hey, watch my podcast, subscribe. Here's my book. Here's my channel for $14 a month. You're gonna get all the info that the mainstream media is gonna get to you. Trust my opinion. Watch my blog. That's what I see a lot of on social media, Julien.
Yeah, it does seem to be. It does seem to be very. I'm trying to find a word that's more not as explicit. That's the one I'm thinking in my
You
mind.
mean like outrage porn?
Well, that could be better. Yeah, outrage porn. Yeah, it does seem to be a lot of dumpster fire.
Yeah.
Just it's like you get on for like 1 minute, and it's just like it's like 9 in the morning, and you get on and you see something. It's like, well, I'm done with the internet for the rest of the day. And it's just,
Yeah.
it's like that.
Do you think maybe there's too many Catholics out there on social media trying to make a livelihood out of their Catholic commentary?
I think that is possible. I recently was talking about this with my spiritual director, because he was asking me a question in regards to my own podcast endeavors, obviously, and and I was just like, I'm not trying to be Taylor Marshall or anything like that. I just want to do this because I have a passion, and I think of like I'm very knowledgeable, and I think I have a different perspective, but I don't think I'm, this big brain and I have the glasses and I'm in this like suit and I'm gonna do this PowerPoint. That's not. I'm just going. I'm more of like. I'm more of a commentator or I guess a journalist in not in the modern sense, but in a classical, not a classical, but in a medieval sense of where I'm just chronicling things that I see around me
Yeah.
and giving my perspective, not saying that this is the totality of everything. But he asked, like, he said to me, Julian, do you think it's appropriate for people to make money off of their Catholicism? And I said, well, it's nuanced. It depends on what they're doing. For somebody like Taylor Marshall, with all of his faults, he was an Episcopal minister, so his degree, he has a PhD. His skill, his trade is in theology, in church things. And so for him to make money, I think he has 8 kids, if I'm not mistaken. So he has to make money somehow off of his skills. If he's not going to be in the priesthood, then he has to make money somehow to support his family. And there's nothing wrong with making money off of Catholicism, but it's how you go about it where it's the issue. And I think how Taylor Marshall goes about it is there are some things where he could be better, and there are some spots where there's spots where he's just fine. And
Yeah.
my spiritual director was like, yeah, that's true.
I guess, Evan, I don't have a problem with Dr. Taylor Marshall per se. I think he does put some good basic information out there. I know my wife, who was a convert to the faith, really appreciates how he explains things about the faith in itself. I don't have it's not so much the money I have a problem with, but there is this factor, whether it's Dr. Taylor Marshall or even us here, my show, frankly speaking, there seems to be a competition for attention. Now, for my part, I've been doing this podcast, I think, for 20 years. I've preached basically the same message of faith for the most part, and how we need to get back to the faith. I don't make any money at this. I've effectively never made any money at this. I make it because, like you, Julien, I got a message out there that's not getting out anywhere, right? My integralist position really always slamming the sort of the classical liberal world and the post-enlightenment world that we have in favor of a greater Catholic culture. That's not a message anybody's going to pay for. Nobody wants to hardly listen to that. But my ideas, Evan, are simply get the ideas out there, because these ideas have been blocked for so long that there is another point of view, there is another message that the mainstream media and the rest of the world has blocked out. My issue, again, not so much money, but there is, I think, everybody trying to get on top of each other so they get their hits and their likes or whatever it is, Evan.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely the temptation, especially in like, it's not even so much, although the people themselves definitely have a part to play. We're all collectively victims of post-modernity and the culture of like subconscious one-upmanship, and that drives people who would otherwise be quite normal, sane individuals, that every time the Holy Father breaks wind, they have a garbage clickbaity title video, and just they end up saying a lot to say nothing, and we see this sort of thing trickle down to the level of the regular people. Like, if you just meet someone and the first thing out of their mouth, "Hey, nice to meet you," did you hear what His Holiness did? Did you hear what? Who cares? I don't even know who you are. Like people like today was the Lord's Day. Like how many people broke their Eucharistic fast, not with food, but by literally devouring their fellow brothers and sisters, their fellow Catholics.
Yeah, yeah, and I've seen that on the other side too. There's let's put it, there's another group that goes after the traditionalist heart as well too for that, where their idea is there's no discernment at all when it comes to a lot of the problems within the church. We got to follow Pope Francis without any proper discernment in that sense. And so there's two extremes there, and it's quite strange as Catholics. Julian, from my part, listen, I don't go around talking about other Catholics. When I bring up the names of, Dr. Taylor Marshall and Church Militant, I see them all as brothers in Christ. My only point is that social media, whether it's me personally, because I have a fallen nature like anybody else, or Church Militant, or Dr. Taylor Marshall, or Timothy Gordon, whoever it may be, social media can change the very nature of who we are if we're not careful, even as devout followers of Christ.
Yeah, it's about, we all want to be liked. We all want to be adored. We all want to be the person that everybody's talking about when you walk into the room. Good talk or even bad talk. We all want to be the center of attention. It's part of our human nature, and that's not a bad thing, but it's how it's used that determines if it's good or bad. Wanting to be liked and wanting to have people ask your opinions and for you to give them, there's nothing wrong with that. And also necessarily seeking it out either. But it's when it starts turning into this, one-upmanship and clickbaits, and I need likes, and I wrecked the Pope, or I wrecked this bishop, or I slam dunked on this Catholic, yeah. And then it starts turning into, I would say, more of a hubris or pride or arrogance, or maybe an amalgamation of all of them. Would you say that, Evan?
Yeah, and that's the thing. We don't have the luxury of fighting one particular thing. We can probably, in our own lives, tackle issues one at a time, but evil one doesn't sleep. People's silly ideas, even especially our own, never sleep. So we're thrown in the midst of all these things, and we have to both make sense of it and plot a course forward. But yeah, we're certainly not in a comfy situation where we have the luxury to pick and choose.
How does this affect relations with Catholics in other parts of the world, whether it's the more remote kind of third world countries or even the church in the East, Evan? Because I tend to sense that our modern technology, like we're talking about, the social media, has changed us in a lot of different ways, and how we treat each other, especially when I see a lot of people using anonymous names and things of that nature, where they can be very candid because they believe they're being protected behind a screen name in that respect. I think when you get to certain parts of the world that maybe don't have the same amount of social media access, how does this affect the Western Church and the Eastern Church in that respect?
I mean, even on the level of like what you said, like social media access, even places like the Middle East, where if you want to be connected, you can still be connected. It's not a problem, but just the quality of, I mean, I'm sure there are problems in the Middle Eastern churches too, but the struggles they have on a daily basis are of an entirely different and rather substantial nature compared to most of us here who, did you see, once again, just devouring our brothers and sisters, when over there they're worried about real things for the most part.
Like, are they going to be, genocide that week
Yeah,
or
is this
something.
is this provisional government going to be generous to us instead of all these other issues? So there's that
Disconnect?
that disconnect, that dissonance. But even generally speaking, like all of the Eastern Catholic churches have their own sort of thing going, and that's really the whole point of the church. It's for everyone. And so it can be interesting when the 1 to 3% of the Eastern churches look to the big 99 or 97, whatever percent Roman church and just like have to stop and take a breather.
Yeah.
Because, of course, other people are influenced by some of the stuff on the one end, like, oh, maybe we need to tinker with things the way they have, or on the other end, um, okay, we have to, like, obviously, people are people, no matter where they're from. And we all suffer the same temptations. We all suffer despite our different cultural baggage or personal situation, we are all collectively suffering under post modernity
Yeah.
and the same spiritual struggle.
Yeah. Julian, your thoughts?
I just want to, Evan, could you expand upon how the East, that is within communion with Rome and outside of the communion with Rome, how they view all of these? I would feel, I don't want to be demonstrative, but the petty squabbles really between the traditional Catholics within the traditional Catholic world and the traditional Catholics in Novus Ordo, just all of this, just really just stabbing your brother, all just stabbing all your brothers, and do you think that kind of hurts the chances of greater union with the East, that is with communion with Rome and not in communion with Rome?
Well, speaking to those currently outside of communion, it's not as if things are uh, all sunny on the Bosporus. Like, if you cross into the east, you'll find once again that they have their petty squabbles. I mean, it's easy to sort of we see a lot of the Western decadence and all the ensuing trouble, and it's easy to fetishize this far distant, exotic East. And then you get there, it's like, oh, never mind. They're having the same issues we are. They're having bishop that the deacon goes to get the bishop coffee, and it's like, oh, they're not bringing him coffee. Oh, all these moral scandals, all these spiritual upheavals, all these people who are in positions of authority or presumed authority that are unqualified, that is everywhere. Now, granted, those outside of communion want to make a quick buck off our sort of misfortune. Even like they'll tell the Easterners in communion, like, oh, see, you're attaching yourself to all this nonsense, and of course being very selective in their outrage about it. And at the end of the day, it's business as usual for people because at the end of the day, for the whole business of communion is about charity. Have you extinguished the light of charity in your heart? Because as St. Paul says, if I can do miracles, I can do this, but if I have not charity, I'm banging cymbal. So
Okay.
at the end
Okay.
of the day, that's the most important thing that I see as breaking through a lot of these sorts of struggles. Like I even joked once to the good response of a lot of people in and out of communion that we can all be a part of the ecumenism of cringe because it affects all of us.
Yeah. Well, listen, I've backed off my critique of the hierarchy over the past few years because I'm starting to see a spiritual element that's encompassed the world, a sort of a dark satanic cloud, if you want to call it that, when we look at the state of politics, culture, and the faith and things of that nature. But I think for trads, they oftentimes, I think, bring up some good points. And I guess that's my next question for you, gentlemen. Where we're all interfighting, well, we all believe we all have the answers here, and we all on the front lines trying to scream and yell, fire, fire, fire in the church. Is there some valid points that traditionalists have? I mean, the problems in the church. A lot of us are just kind of wondering where we're going with this. We seem to lack a certain sense of security, I guess, within the Catholic world. The sense of security, I don't think Catholics have ever suffered from in past history. I mean, even throughout past generations, even after the Protestant Reformation and the Enlightenment of that nature, the church always was confident in its mission and in many respects in its message. But the church has seemed to lost confidence in some capacities, and we seem to be retreating and capitulating to the world. Julien, how far can we go in critiquing some of the problems we see within the Catholic Church?
Well, I mean, it's not like in some of the Middle Ages where you have bishops saying heretical things from the pulpit, and a lone parishioner or a lone Catholic, however you want to name them, stands up and says, "This bishop is a heretic. We have no bishop." I mean, we haven't, and this isn't hyperbole or a made up story. There are tons of stories throughout history of heretical or errant bishops and priests saying things, and the congregation, by either the sensus fidelium, the sense of the faith, or being well schooled in their faith, understanding what is being preached to them is outright heresy.
But Julien, who is qualified to call a bishop or priest a heretic? Just any member of the laity can do that?
I don't think so. I don't think that a person who's a laity a person of the laity cannot formally declare anyone a formal heretic, but they are within their rights, I believe, from what I understand, and from my knowledge at this point in time, that you are able to call someone a heretic or say what you're doing or what you're saying is heretical, and therefore you are a heretic. But to proclaim you as a formal heretic, that is reserved for the hierarchy. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you as an individual cannot spot heresy and declare it when you see it. What I was trying to make about the point about back in the Middle Ages, people, when they heard heresy from the pulpit and saying those things like this bishop is a heretic, we have no bishop, and stuff like that. It hasn't. I was trying to say that in our modern times we haven't gotten to that point, which could probably be could be seen as good or bad, depending. But because there are a lot of bishops that have outright said heretical things or done heretical things, and the church has leaders. It has a small contingent of strong leadership and individual bishops, like Bishop Snyder or Cardinal Burke or Cardinal Gerhard Mueller, but really these people, I would say they're like generals or commanders, but they're not the commander in chief. They're not the king emperor. They're not top dog. They're not the Pope. And the Pope and just the church in general, the church itself, and as you said, has lost its confidence and therefore it's causing everybody else to be uneasy. And it is also capitulating to all of the uneasiness of the world. The church, the Vatican, the secular, and even in I I I, I I've noticed for a very long time in the religious sphere, there doesn't seem to be any real difference in what the church is saying and what you can find on CNN or NBC. They're literally saying one and the same thing at this point. They're lockstep. And that, to me, I think is indicative of just poor leadership
Yeah.
in the church.
Yeah, I mean, Evan, I know for me, and maybe you can answer this question better. I know you're headed into the seminary about who can answer a lot of these questions. For me, I've backed off my criticism of the hierarchy of the church over the past few years. I was very vocal a few years back on social media, and one of the issues that I struggled with was, first of all, I'm not a perfect person. I struggle with sin and my own fallen nature. Second of all, I'm not a theologian, and so I don't feel comfortable going into that realm. But I'm also, a guy that has a relatively pretty decent IQ, and I can see issues going on in the church that are troublesome. And this is where the trads are come in. Now, I'm not saying they're right on all the points they make, but is it fair to say that the trads have some valid points with the struggles in the church?
I mean, absolutely. People are complaining about valid things for the most part, especially with the context of like all the upheaval in the last 6 decades or so of the church. I mean, the only issue is that, and I've said this before, that some trads, especially particular communities, experience something very akin to battered spouse syndrome. Like they've been so abused by a lot of the authority figures around them that, like a whistle, just sends them ducking to the ground and all this sort of thing. And so a lot of the ordinaries are like, why are people freaking out over A, B, and C? It's like, well, these people have been in a rough situation for a very long time, and so all of us need to sort of, in these sorts of struggles, like you said, you were mindful of yourself, and that's really, I would venture to say, it's the most important thing, because it's easy to look at someone from the outside, but it's harder to pay attention. Oh, how do I come across? What assumptions am I making?
Right.
Adding to the situation.
I know for my part, when I made some public statements on social media about the church, and particularly Pope Francis, I know actually, not that I was necessarily wrong in what I said about him, but I just never felt I had the authority. It wasn't my place. And for that, I actually went to confession for it. So something that was on my conscience. And I believe that that's where a lot of us really struggle right now, because we do see some of the problems, but nobody knows how to resolve these problems. But at the same time, Evan, Our Lady said that this time will come to pass. And, a lot of theologians and priests have talked about how, just as our Lord had to walk to the cross, he suffered through his passion. This is the moment of the passion of the church. And it seems to me, and maybe this is a cop out, but maybe it is time where our faith is being tested. Yes, there's certain things in the church, in the culture, in the political system that have encompassed the world, but it is our job to remain faithful and steadfast in our faith, protect our families as best we can, and ultimately, in the end, for as much as we want to get on social media, scream and yell, this is wrong, that's wrong, it's up to us to be faithful and remember that it's our Lord's church, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, the church has been in the so-called end times ever since Pentecost. Already, within a generation, St. John is already writing to you, oh yeah, there'll be one Antichrist, but even so many Antichrists have come. And like you said, there's a lot that's up to us, because after all, I mean, God actually, despite temptation to the contrary, God actually does know what he's doing.
Yeah.
So he'll be faithful. It's his church. And we only have to worry about ourselves. Are we being faithful? Even like like you sort of hinted with your self-reflective bit, is this appropriate to our state in life? Like, what's it? It's easy. Like I said before, it's easy for the evil one to get us trapped in
Yeah.
the theoretical, in the big global church matters. When, wait, you may be a father. How am I treating my wife and kids? Like, what's directly in front of me? And those things don't always fall by the wayside, but it's certainly something to pay attention to. If
Yeah.
you're a student if you're a child under your parents, is spurging out over all this stuff conducive to being obedient to my parents, or is this, whatever our state in life is, whatever is directly in front of us? That's what's real. When we ask Our Lady to pray for us, it's not just the hour of our death; it's right now. The most important trailing moment of our life is right now, and anything that keeps us away from the present moment, the duty that's in front of us, is just going to stir up our passions and not help anything.
Yeah. Julien, I've known you for a while now. I think you're more of a let's go out there and fight in the streets, man, kind of guy. What are your thoughts?
I definitely am. What Evan said is true, and that's good, and it should not be dismissed or looked down upon in any way, shape, or form. But you're right. I am a little bit more of the active. Let's go out there and do things. That's just my nature. And I'm all about the praying too. You need both, and if we really honestly care about souls, if we truly believe that we are our brother's keeper, why would we allow the church to become so small and so politically, culturally irrelevant? The Benedict option. That to me is cowardice. That to me is not necessarily giving up, but it's like, oh, I just don't want to fight anymore. So I'll just, give me my 50 acres of land. We can all just live here. But the thing is, though, these people aren't going to stop. You're not going to be able to have the Benedict option. You're not going to be able to have your commune. They're going to come for you wherever you're at.
Mhm.
They don't want you to exist, even on your commune, because therefore you still are a threat. And if we truly believed in that it is our duty not only to save our own souls, but make sure that other people are taking care of their souls and know that they need to get right with God, then everyone should have the missionary zeal.
Okay,
For soul.
Julien, let me give you the response from the trads. Okay. There are some trads online that follow Catholic prophecy that would tell you that the collapse of Western civilization, the world, we're at a point of apostasy. That's all going to collapse. There's nothing we can do to stop this now. It's all supposed to pass. It's up to us to grab our backpacks and go up in some high mountain up in Montana and repopulate the world after the Lord chastises the entire planet, Julien. I mean, this is inevitable, isn't it?
Well, I mean, the great thing about private revelation is it's private. That's the great beauty. That's the great beauty of it. Private revelation does not free you from your job to go out and baptize everyone in the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost. That does not free you from your obligation to preach the word of your Lord and Savior and his plan for you, and the fact that your salvation is through him. That does not stop you from doing that. You must preach these truths in and out of season. That's all. That's what I have to say to that.
Evan, your thoughts?
Yeah, these things don't, not even so far as even revelation, private or not, these things, that nothing really inhibits us from doing the will of God as we are called to in our own lives. There's never going to be a point where we're left with no choice. Sure, we can paint ourselves into an awkward theological corner, but at the end of the day, when we do that, we know that we messed up. But there's never going to be a time where we've exhausted all our options and our only choice is to take the blue pill or whatever the devil you want to call it.
Yeah.
We're not excused from inaction, but we're also not excused from obedience to the church. Prudential decisions are not guided by the Holy Spirit. They're generally safe, but even these sorts of things, even though people may be wounded, it's not going to be a wound unto death. There's always going to be something.
Okay.
It may be the things that we're facing right now. There may be things in the future that we don't even realize. But at the end of the day, there's work that we have collectively to do, and there's work individually. But the good thing is that we'll always have the tools to do that work. This is, like we said before, this is Christ's church. He's not going to leave us orphans. He's not going to say, oh, yeah, good luck with that. He's going to give us all the graces that we need. We just have to be responsive to that.
Okay, gentlemen. Let's see. We're 47 minutes into this here. Let's get to the final thoughts here tonight. Julien, you brought us together tonight. You want to talk about the trads here? I think we've had a pretty good conversation. I know it's a confusing time. I know we Catholics are at each other's throats because of these confusing times. I agree with you, by the way, that it's not our job just to run for the hills and hide in a forest somewhere. We have our duties to spread the faith and continue to fight the good fight. But we also have a duty to tell the truth, right? You know, with me, I'm not a theological mind per se, though I praise everything about the church and I love Holy Mother Church. For me, it's more of a historical and political fight. You guys know I've taken my pound of flesh out on the classical liberal civilization on this show and over at the Knights of Christendom. But in that respect, the good fight, how far do we go, Julien? Your final thoughts.
How far do we go for the good fight? Till the end. The apostles changed the world, and there were very few people. If you look at any revolution throughout history, whether it's in Russia, whether it's in France, whether it's the Glorious Revolution in 1688 in England, or the English Civil War that saw Charles I beheaded after the end of it, or if you look at the Russian Revolution or the Chinese Revolution, any revolution you pick, there's always a zealous, militant minority that is ruthless and will brook no opposition to get what they want. And in the end, they get what they want, as we have seen throughout history. I think what we need to do is take a small leaf out of their playbook and understand that we don't need to have huge sweeping numbers to bring about massive change, and for the better. These people, these revolutions brought about massive changes, and not, in my opinion, for the good. But they brought about change nonetheless. A small minority brought about change. We too can do the same thing, but we can bring about good change, just like the small apostles, 12 of them, went out and they Christianized an entire empire. Their efforts Christianized an entire empire. That to me is the good fight, is that you need to have a small, committed, fierce, and zealous group that is willing to see it to the end and will brook no opposition to getting what they want. That's my final thought.
Very well said. And Evan, I would ask you the same thing, but you're in a seminary going into the priesthood, right? I mean, that's you're going to the ultimate end. You're fighting the good fight, my friend, and we love you for that, and we honor you for that. But your final thoughts, my friend.
Yeah, that's the idea. It's final
You're
thoughts.
fighting the good fight. You're fighting the good fight. We love you for that, Evan.
Thank God. And the thing is that I have a lot of really good solid men that are signing up to fight the fight with me, and that's been frankly the most encouraging thing throughout all my time in upper academia and other seminaries of various institutions. The quality of men that are stepping up to sacrifice and give everything till the end has been the definite bonus. A lot of people don't get to see that till people are already ordained in parishes, but I'm seeing sort of a preview, and that always gives me joy. But sorry if you have any thoughts.
Oh, well, no, that's pretty much it, gentlemen. I mean, listen, I know with myself, I've tried to create a little church at home with my family and done the best I can. There are days, I got to admit, gentlemen, that I feel that the whole world is coming in down all around us, and it's difficult. I think even the best of us are barely holding on to the temptations, the titillations of the world, that sometimes it feels so overwhelming, especially when your friends, your neighbors, your families don't even see the light of the faith in the same way that you see it now. And granted, I don't sit here and say that I know it all or have all the answers or I'm perfect as a Catholic in any kind of way, but I have a general good sense of what the faith is. And when you see everybody else around you capitulating to the world and you're the only oddball left and everybody looks at you like you're crazy or something like that, it's tough. It's really tough, gentlemen. For me, it is. And I'm sure you guys feel it too. So, yeah, we got to continue to fight as Catholics, and we got to love the church, and we got to defend her. I was telling a friend of mine today that I think one of the poor things as Catholics we've done is defend not only the Catholic Church, not only Holy Mother Church, but Catholic culture as it once was, a familial system that was much healthier, and in a better state of grace, I guess you could say. We've bought this whole, again, post-Enlightenment republic democracy thing that I think has brought hell on earth. And that's where I think I will start, at least. You gentlemen, I know, will start at the spiritual level. I know you will, Evan, as well too. Julien, you're the monarchist here. I know what you're going to bring to the table. Hey, this podcast is going to be up over, Frankly Speaking. It's also going to be up at Julien's site, May He Reign. I'm going to put a link up in the description box. Gentlemen, Julien, my friend, I want to thank you. Evan, I want to thank you for joining me tonight, guys.
Thank you for having us.
Our pleasure.
All right, gentlemen. This is Frank signing off for Frankly Speaking and Julien for May He Reign. Good night, everybody.